So this is part of a scheme which is being managed by Cumbria Tourism as part of the Westmoreland and Furness Green Enterprise Hub, which is funded by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and is being managed by Westmoreland and Furness Council. It's part of a wider scheme of training where Cumbria Tourism are leading on, but the hub itself is a really good resource for Westmoreland and Furness-based businesses and organisations to tap into. It's been headed up by Cumbria Action for Sustainability, and it's designed as almost a one-stop shop for businesses and organisations who are looking to become more sustainable. You can contact their central number and they will flag up a lot of different resources and subsidised funding and help in the local area to help decarbonise all different areas of your business. So this training forms one part of that programme, and this mainly focuses on food waste. So it's about reducing food waste, encouraging waste of food redistribution where there's surpluses, and encouraging environmentally friendly composting. So this is obviously the latter of those three. There's a mixture of people that are all delivering as part of the hub, and it's also worth noting that as part of a wider Green Enterprise Hub, there is actually a small grant scheme available where you can apply for a proportion of funding towards decarbonisation measures. So why composting? 1.1 million tonnes of food are thrown away by the hospitality and food services sector every year, which is quite a significant amount when you actually look at it. And that's 18% of all the food which is purchased that is being wasted. So organic waste which goes to landfill obviously generates methane, which is a pretty potent greenhouse gas. Composting that waste of food actually reduces the amount of methane emissions quite significantly depending on the type of composting, and it also produces rich fertilizers which can be used in other ways as well. So food waste obviously has quite a significant impact on the carbon footprint. Food and drink is quite significant in Cumbria. I think behind transport, food and drink is one of the significant greenhouse areas in terms of carbon reduction. And then if you look at food waste on its own, behind transport, food waste on its own, they said if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of carbon after the US and China. So looking at ways we can reduce the carbon that's given out by our food and drink is quite a significant area. I'm just going to pass you on to the master composters now. So this is Debbie Adkins and Frankie Kennett, and they're running a project. So they're just going to give you a little bit more of a background around composting, the do's and don'ts, and ways to get involved.
Right, I'm just going to try and share my screen. Hang on. Can you see that? Is that coming up?
Yeah, that's good.
Brilliant. Okay, I shall begin. Okay, yeah, I think as Gemma said, Frankie and I from Cumbria Master Compost. I think we have another master composter in the audience today as well, which is great. Now, basically, our remit as Cumbria Master Composters is to really advise on domestic composting, which includes food waste. But much of what we talk about is applicable on a larger scale. So it can all be scaled up from quite a small, a small back garden to much larger scale in a commercial operation. But there are separate options I'm going to talk about today, which are applicable more on a large commercial scale. This is going to be more of a signposting session because it's a massive topic. But we do have a lot of in-house expertise at Garden Organic on a larger scale. So we've just started a project, I think, with English Heritage, and we have advised on other tourism projects in other parts of the country. So what we're going to cover is very briefly why compost, because Gemma's just touched on that. The actual composting process, which is really important to understand because there are a lot of claims out there when you start Googling this about certain systems which can produce compost in 24 hours. And if you understand how compost is made, you can kind of discern whether or not the claims made by various manufacturers of composting systems are actually producing compost or not. We look at what you can put in it in terms of food waste and other waste, choosing the right system for you, and other methods on the market such as dehydration, which I think is important to touch on, just to sort of show you what what other options are out there. We're not going to be advocating for other things other than composting, but I think it's important to give a really good broad overview. So Gemma's touched on this already about why compost obviously reduces pollution, but as well as the reducing pollution, it promotes biodiversity. Just by having a compost heap, you're hosting millions of bacteria and creatures, which is really important for the species to feed on. So just by doing nothing but letting your organic matter decay down, you are doing a very good thing for the planet. It also improves your soil. And another thing is, I think, which is really pertinent to businesses, is it improves your credentials as an eco business. So if you're trying to attract customers who are, I think more increasingly looking for eco-friendly businesses, if you can show that you're composting, it's just another feather in your cap, really, even if you're not doing it for altruistic reasons. And also it's just part of the kind of the cycle of waste. So you are taking ownership of your own waste. So what is it? A surprising number of people that I speak to don't know the difference between compost and soil. Compost is simply completely made of decayed organic matter, fruit, vegetables, grass leaves, twigs, even cardboard, whereas soil has a little bit of organic matter, but it's mainly comprised of sand, silt and clay, and it feels a lot heavier than compost. So here you can just see on the left-hand side, just a simple caddy of things you can put in your compost heap. The middle photo just shows it breaking down, and the bottom right-hand corner you can see the finished product, which hopefully everybody can achieve if they do it correctly. It's a composting process, really simple diagram here, but I think it's really important to look at the essential ingredients, because it'll help you understand better how it works and why it might not be working. So the organic matter is anything that's basically been living. We divide it into browns and greens, and I'll go into a bit more detail in a minute about that. Greens tend to be rich in nitrogen and provide moisture, and browns are more woody material, rich in carbon, and add air to the organic matter, which is decaying, and they both work together to break down to produce compost. Within that, the oxygen and the water I've touched on, because that tends to be provided by the browns and the greens, and the macro and the microorganisms are the things that play the really key role in breaking down the organic matter. So it's a simple diagram, but it is really important to understand that these are the key ingredients. So hold these in your head whilst I progress, because it will all make sense. So here's just an example of what you can put in. You can put all of these things into any compost heap. They are safe. And I say that from the point of view of there being safe from rats, because that's always a number one fear factor, I think, for people. So in terms of putting food into any kind of composting system, sort of raw vegetables and fruit waste, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, tea leaves, they can be really put into any sort of composting system. They are considered safe. I'm going to go on to other foods, which might be, but you have to exercise a bit of caution on in a minute. But as well as that, on the greens, you've got your weeds, your nettles, very good for composting, grass mowings, and the browns. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's mainly things that are derived from trees, woody prunings as well. Egg boxes are brilliant, and even hair. May not rot down, but it provides a lot of good nutrients into your compost. A few things that are a mixture of the two. Tea leaves and bags. Obviously the tea leaves we consider to be greens. The bags are browns. Now, just a word on that, because I know that a lot of people are obviously concerned about microplastics in the soil, and there has been a lot of press recently about tea bags containing microplastics. The best thing to do is, if you're unsure at all, is to basically not put the bags in, but also to check the manufacturer's website, because I think a lot more of them are mindful of this now, and there are some that claim to be, I think, plastic free. But it is something that's it's worth being mindful of. Also with pet bedding, make sure it's a vegetarian pet, so don't put your cat litter in. I think the rest of these are self-explanatory. Eggshells, brilliant for composting. They will come out looking like eggshells at the end of the process, but you can still put them on your garden. They're really good for slug deterrent, and also just adding a bit of texture to your soil. So don't be worried that they don't look like they're breaking down. They will do eventually. So things to be treated with caution. Now, in theory, all food can be composted, but you'll see when I talk about which sort of composting system to use a little bit later on, that you do need to be mindful of certain foods, processed foods, meat, dairy, even bread. These are an absolute banquet for rats. So if you're putting them on an open heap, you are literally providing a lovely buffet table for rats. So you can compost these, but there are certain systems. Basically, the systems really require you to have a sealed base and lid. Now, even with a sealed base and lid, you'll still have little air holes, so it doesn't restrict the oxygen getting in, but the sealed base is really important. So this is worth bearing in mind. We're talking about what sort of composting system to use. I think obvious, non-compostable matter, plastics or glass, but also don't put your Christmas tree in whole, because it will come out looking like a Christmas tree at the end of the process. Just make sure anything that's large and woody gets chopped up before putting it in. So once you've got all your ingredients into your compost pile, oh no, hang on, I'm just going to talk about compostable packaging actually. This has come up a lot recently. People ask this a lot when we're doing talks. Compostable packaging. Yes, you can compost compostable packaging, but there is no current industry standardization. So you'll see a lot of things with the seedling logo on the packaging. And these will break down, but they need to be composted down at a hot temperature, and I'll come on to that in a bit. But if you're putting it into a sort of just a heap in the bottom of your garden, or outside, just not in a special sort of hot composting bin, they may not break down for a very long time. So they'll break down in the normal way if they are composted at a hot temperature. The little sort of foam, well, it looks like foam packaging on the right, they are actually a lot of them made of cornstarch now. So the way to test that is to run it under the tap and you'll see it start to dissolve. So you can compost compostable packaging, but sometimes you'll find that, for example, with a compostable cup, the cardboard on the outside might break down, but there's often a sort of plasticky lining inside which hasn't broken down. So the only way to really know is to experiment. And don't feel that you failed if whatever you put in your compost heap with the compostable packaging label hasn't actually worked. So what happens when you put your ingredients in? Basically, the organisms get to work, it heats up. You can add air in if it doesn't feel particularly warm, but you'll find that just by adding browns, such as egg boxes, which create air pockets, will speed up the process, or you can turn it. You don't actually have to turn your compost heap, but it does make a difference in terms of speeding up the process. Again, moisture is essential, but we don't tend to worry too much about that in Cumbria. And green matter itself will provide the moisture that you need. So basically, the compost heap will heat up as the matter's breaking down, then it cools down at the end once it's matured. So looking at composting system, this is what you will want to know about, I'm sure. Lots of things to think about. How much space do you actually have, both inside and out? How much green and brown waste do you have, and what's the ratio? We normally always say having a nice even mix of green and brown is essential for composting, but it depends on the system you're using. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But you need to maybe consider whether or not you have garden waste that you can add, or cardboard packaging, for example. Sort of food waste you have, do you have mainly non-processed? Do you just have vegetable and fruit peelings and coffee grounds? Or do you have a lot of food waste, processed food waste that you've collected from uneaten food waste from the tables? How much time you've got to invest in this? It's possible to do it with a minimal amount of time, but there are certain systems that require you to have quite a lot of time and also to develop a certain skill set. So that might not be for you. Cost, you can do it for free, or it can actually run into thousands if you get a sophisticated system, but you can actually start doing this for free. But you might also obviously going to weigh it up against the costs that you are paying to have food waste removed professionally. And in the long term, it may well pay off, or it should hopefully pay off, that you do as much composting of your food waste or looking after it as you can. So look upon it as an investment as opposed to an outflow. And also look at your future business plans. What might work for you now? If you're looking to scale up, obviously you're going to have to factor that into whatever system you look at taking on. So looking at a really simple starting point, compost bins for non-processed food waste. You're probably looking at it thinking, well, this looks like what you'd use in your back garden, but actually this may be sufficient if you're a small cafe, or you don't have a lot of food waste, or you just want to start experimenting without having a huge capital outlay. You can get some pallets for free from builder sites, build pallets in the back garden if you've got back garden or your surrounding green space that you have next to your business. If you've got garden waste that you can compost with vegetable peelings, pallets are great. The thing that all of these have in common, apart from the wormery on the right, which I'm not going to talk about because Ro is going to come on to talking about worm composting. I don't want to steal her thunder. But the thing that all these bins have is they don't have a base. So that's where you have to be aware of potential for rats, and that's why you would not put processed food or meat or dairy products into these particular bins. But I think they're a really good place to start if you are new to composting and you just want to see how it works, because you can scale up from this. You can get these bins also on places like Freegal, so you just don't have to spend any money if you don't want to. Just start simply and don't feel overwhelmed. These bins here all have, apart from the one on the right, the digester, they all have sealed base, and they also have a lid, and they have air holes in them, obviously, to let the airflow come through. But they tend to be, I can't say rat proof, but they're as close as you can be to being rat proof. We found for domestic use, a green joanna or a small cafe, we know small cafes that have a couple of green joannas, really good all-round bins. These will take usually about 75% food waste, so more food waste. If you don't have a lot of garden waste, you don't need to worry too much. You could basically put your food waste in here, add things like cardboard as brown matter, and compost your food this way. And you can apparently put a chicken carcass in here. You can put all kinds of things, so you don't need to worry so much about, you shouldn't have to worry at all really about rats. They'll produce compost more quickly because they'll heat up to 60 degrees plus. Frankie, who's my co-presenter, hasn't said anything yet, but she will soon, has got a hot bin and loves it. Tumblers are great, but they can get quite heavy to turn if you have a big tumbler, so just be mindful of that. But all of these systems, really good all-rounders for food waste, and a good place to start again if you're unsure about scaling up to a much bigger size. And I did check, actually, I'll produce a list of websites at the end, but there's a website called getcomposting.com, and if you put your postcode in, they'll tell you if there's any special deals going on in your area. And green joannas are currently retailing, I think, for £99, or they were last week, so that's a bit of a discount. So worth having a look at that if you're interested. The one on the right, we call it a digester, and that needs no maintenance at all. It's just got a basket at the bottom. You put it into the ground and you just continually feed it food. Now, all I would say is, if you're producing a lot of food waste, it's not going to be the system for you, because obviously it's going to fill up pretty quickly. But if you don't ever want to harvest compost, it's actually a really good way of doing a bit for the environment. It will feed the soil, and you can just let it do its thing without actually having to ever do anything to it apart from feed it, hopefully. So that's just a brief overview of hot and cold composting systems, and hopefully you'll sort of understand the difference. Just go back, the difference between the two. Basically, hot means hot, and it tends to have a sealed base. and cold means it's not cold, but it doesn't get as hot as the hot stuff. Now, just looking at larger scale solutions, I'm having to sort of rocket through these, if you'll pardon the pun, because we don't have a lot of time. But if you are producing a lot of food, if you're a hotel, for example, or a school, there are rockets of various sizes, and these basically are called continual throughput composting. So you feed it at one end and you can take the compost out at the other, and it aims to produce compost in 2 weeks. It does require a bit of maturation after that in separate bins, but it does work more quickly. Should have said the previous systems I talked about, cold composting can take 6 to 12 months, and the hot composting systems take about 3 to 6, depending on other factors. But the rocket produces compost within as little as 2 to 4 weeks. It's a semi-automated process, so you feed the food in at one end, but you have to mix it with wood chip, because obviously you need brown material as well. But it will basically, it's got paddles inside and it will aerate it, and the microbes. It's just basically a speeded up composting process, which is semi-automated. But it's a potentially good option if you have a lot of food waste, but also a lot of a decent amount of outdoor space as well, or a lot of money to spend, because these can cost a few £1,000s. So that's why I would say start small before you start investing on a larger scale. Another more eco-friendly variation of this is the Rydan, and hopefully I'm correct in saying that Growing Well have Rydans, and Long Clume, the lovely Simon Rogan restaurant down south, I think has several. This is a very eco-friendly way of composting because it just requires human power. There's a diagram showing how it works in a very similar way to the rocket, but it just uses human power to turn it. And I think it does require, you've got to think about how much time you can spend doing this. If you've got gardeners employed on site, or I think in schools, it's a good solution because you can involve school children. I think if you have the time, inclination, it's an excellent system to use, but it does require commitment on a daily basis. You can also see to the right there are some bins there. So once the compost is produced at one end, it does require a bit of a few weeks just to mature in the bins to one side. I've included the Rydan website address there, but actually, if you look at it, it's got a really good video on showing how it works. So it is one certainly to consider if you're looking at scaling up. I just wanted to touch on food drying, because you will often see on websites where they are selling the rocket and the Rydan, they'll also have what they call food waste dehydrators or dewaterers, which basically does what it says on the tin. It reduces the volume of the waste by 80 to 90% just by macerating and dehydrating it. The grey water, which could be a problem in good models, basically evaporates as steam and condenses back into clear sterilised water, which goes into the drain. However, what I would say, it's not compost in the sense that we understand it. It actually produces a dry sterile powder. You can store this for several weeks without degrading. You can even add it to a compost pile. But obviously, if you add it to something like the rocket, you've taken the moisture out and you're going to have to put moisture back into the rocket. So it sort of defeats the object. But if you don't have any outside space and you want to do your bit, I mean, it obviously will reduce the amount of food waste that's been transported for processing, and it can be used in biomass fuel. So it's not the most eco-friendly solution, but I thought it was worth touching on because it can be so confusing when you're doing your research and all these other options come up and you think, well, hang on, is this composting or isn't it? And I'm not saying this is a bad solution at all. It's just to be aware of what the differences are. I've included a website below called Food Waste Dryer, so you can have a little look for yourself. But I've got some more useful websites at the end of this. We're almost at the end. And a word about bokashi. I don't want to confuse you all, but this is another method, and it's without the use of oxygen. Basically, you put your food in a sealed container. You can see on the left how it works small scale. Once it's full, once it's full, you add your bran as you go along. This is a special type of bokashi bran. You seal it, and in 2 weeks, basically, you'll have some fermented food. It doesn't produce compost, but you can actually safely add it to one of the cold composting methods I talked about, such as like a Dalek bin or a pallet bay, because the pickling action of the bran deters rats. So if you don't have sealed bins, but you do want to, you've got some small amount of food waste to compost, it's worth looking at bokashi. You can actually scale it up as well. We've got I'm not going to go into detail about this, but we did do an experiment on a larger scale in Shropshire, and the details are on our website. So if you Google bokashi garden organic, you will see how this works. Quite complicated, but it basically works by wrapping things in big black plastic, which I'm not in favour of, but it was an experiment. So I would caveat doing large scale bokashi with, bear in mind you've got to sort of eliminate the oxygen for the process to work, and that does include really using something like plastic to do that, so not ideal. The other thing you can do with the contents of your bokashi bin once it's fermented, you can actually dig a trench and bury it about 60 centimeters down and then plant into it in a few weeks. And Frankie, I might get her to say a few words. Frankie actually did this experiment last year, and she dug a trench in her allotment, I think, or a garden, planted in her potatoes, and they were supercharged just by planting the contents of the pickled contents of her bokashi bin. Do you want to say anything about that, Frankie?
Well, I think you pretty much covered it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, bokashi harnesses the power of beneficial bacteria, and that having I did a few not very well thought out experiments on bokashi. I just practicing, experimenting with bokashi, and had a massive harvest in comparison to the trench that didn't have anything in. So I will be continuing those experiments this year. Hopefully with some other crops and some other methods as well. But yes, it is a great accompaniment to cold composting. There is the ongoing cost of the bokashi bran, but it's in comparison to what some of the larger composting systems, it certainly is a viable option, and it inoculates your compost or your soil with the effective microorganisms that are in the bran, or you can also have an effective microorganism spray, and that ferments the food and stops it going putrid in an anaerobic environment. But
sorry, didn't mean to. Yeah. My final thing, I'm conscious we're out of time. I just wanted to make you aware there's something else that's just come onto the market. I've featured it here. It's called an Auckland composter. That's the brand name. They have claimed to have patented some microbial technology and produce compost in 24 hours. I'm not going to comment on whether I think that's true because I don't know enough, but you can see that there are apparently technological advances that are claiming to be able to produce compost very quickly. I suspect they are very expensive. They don't have prices on the website, but it's just potentially, is this the future? I don't know, but I thought it was worth flagging up. So I'm pretty much there. There are some really useful websites here. I can forward these on, so I'm not going to go through them all now. Tidy Waste Planet at the top. Very good site if you're looking at scaling up, because it gives you all the different options, and they can actually do a waste audit for you to give you the best system for your business. Smaller scale, Great Green Systems and getcomposting.com, great for looking at different types of bins, including bokashi and just normal compost bins. KarenComposting.com, great for just talking about the composting process and demystifying it. And obviously our good selves, Garden Organic, lots of interesting, useful stuff on there, online composting course and experiments and whatnot. And just finally, we've got some compost demonstration sites, Gosling Site, Ford Park, and Millham Network Centre, and a new one coming Queen Catherine School in Kendal. So you can go and have a look and see how it all works. That's more on a sort of a smaller scale, but worth going to have a look. And that's us. So I'm sorry, I think I've run over time a little bit, but it was a massive topic to cover. So I haven't confused you all.
Thanks, Debbie, much appreciated. Just to say as well, all of the slides and everything will be circulated after the event. So all of those links and everything will be on the slides. And just to say as well, we'll also be taking questions and answers at the end. So if anybody does have any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat function, and we'll have a bit of a question and answer session with all the speakers at the end as well. So I shall pass you on to Ro, who is going to give a little bit of background on vermiculture, and possibly also talk a little bit more about the sort of carbon impacts of composting as well.
Hi, so I can't see you, but I hope that everybody can see my screen. Is that working okay, Gemma? I can see you.
It is, yeah.
Brilliant. So yes, I'm Ro Baker. I work for Cumbria Action for Sustainability, and I'm the lead officer on the Zero Carbon Cumbria Low Carbon Food Programme, amongst other things. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about vermiculture, which is basically worm farming. Vermi comes from the Latin for worm, and it's basically the process of harvesting the power of earthworms to convert organic waste into very nutrient dense fertilizer or worm manure. So I thought I'd start by just giving you a little bit of background information about the fantastic worm. There are three main worm types, and I think most of you will be very familiar with them. The epigeic worm, they're the surface dwellers. So they're the small red worms that if you pick up your plant pot or a slab, you usually find them milling about, or even just on the top layer of your turf in your garden. Then there's the endogeic worm. They're the horizontal burrowers. They're very pale in colour, a little larger, often very pale grey or very pale sort of pinky colour. And then finally you have your anisic worms, which are the very large worms that you find that burrow vertically down. And we need all these types of worms to engineer our soils. They are absolutely fantastic. There are over 4,000 known species of earthworm. 7 of those are suitable for use in worm farming, and they all belong to the epigeic category. So those first worms, the small red worms that you find on the surface of the soil. I'm going to give you a few worm facts that are just amazing. So worms have survived quite a few mass extinctions. They're very, very good at survival. They're going to be here a long time after us, I'm sure. British worms have 5 hearts on a normal basis. They have tiny pinhead-sized brains, and they breathe through their skin. They're hermaphrodite, which means that they can both store their own sperm as well as collect sperm from another worm. So they can both reproduce and clone. And this happens depending on the abundance of food in their sort of habitat. So if things are going really well, they can reproduce. If things are less palatable for them, then they might decide to just clone and keep going that way. But it means they're incredibly resilient creatures. They have a crop and a gizzard, and these are like you find in a bird. So this allows them to process food and grind down grit. They have blood vessels. Earthworms are set apart from most invertebrates as they have hemoglobin in their blood, just like us. And very importantly, they need to have darkness and moisture. Worms don't actually eat your food waste. They live off the microorganisms that break it down. Worms, they don't like acidic conditions, so you have to avoid giving them too much citrus, too much onion, too much coffee. They don't like oily foods because they breathe through their skin and the grease will suffocate them. But apart from that, they can pretty well cope with anything you throw at them. And I know there's been a few questions in the chat about cost. It's an incredibly low input system. Worms are incredibly inexpensive, and you can more or less build this for free. So it can be scaled up, it can be scaled down, and it's used in multiple countries across the globe at state level as well as at domestic level. Epigeic worms, let's just talk a little bit more. This picture at the bottom is really good because you can really see the tiger stripes on them. They're red in colour, they're surface dwellers, they thrive on fresh, rotting organic waste. Throughout the world, they're most commonly employed. The species is the tiger worm, or they're sometimes referred to as red wigglers or the Californian red. But they're your short, small, thin red worms, usually stripy. They're native to Europe. They're exceptionally adaptable and tolerant to a huge range of food sources, and they can survive under different temperature variations. The tiger worm is particularly good at reproducing very quickly. It has the capacity to double its population every 60 days, and it can consume up to half its body weight a day. So they're great for organic waste management. They can cope with everything from cow manure right the way through to the food that you throw at them. And they can adapt to a different range of sources of organic material, from like cardboard to you know, any of these packaging items that we're talking about before. Working with Anna de la Vega from the Urban Worm. She gets her worms from Yorkshire Worms. They came in the post. I bought some last week, but you can get them off Amazon, and there will be other providers. They're not expensive. So why worms? Well, food waste emits the greenhouse gases methane and nitrous oxide, and they're 31 and 310 times stronger than carbon dioxide, respectively. On an individual and grassroots level, worm farming has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and significantly reduce the volume of food waste that goes to landfill. This, in turn, alleviates the necessity for fossil fuel-powered collection vehicles. So it's an all-round win-win. And if you go to somewhere like the Philippines or New Zealand, they're utilising vermiculture at a state level to deal with all of their food waste. Worm manure, also worm castings or vermicompost, is teeming with minerals, nutrients and beneficial microorganisms. All of them are essential for healthy plant growth, root development and disease suppression. Due to the nutritional superiority of worm manure, farmers and gardeners often refer to it as black gold. And 1 tablespoon is enough to feed a small planet for 3 months. A small plant for 3 months. It would be good if it was the planet. So we're not having to use synthetic fertilizers. It's incredibly eco-friendly and it's totally natural. More and more scientists are discovering that worms have the ability to clean toxic waste. They can regenerate contaminated farmlands and industrial sites. They can cleanse the pesticides that are used for food production, and they support the development of healthy communities and healthy food. And not only that, but scientists are finding evidence to suggest that the sound of worms in a healthy soil stimulates the growth and development of mycorrhizames and other beneficial fungi. So the more research that scientists do on soils and healthy soils, the more they're understanding about the role of worms in that really important ecosystem. Worms support water purification. They can affect agricultural runoff and runoff from roads, from tyres and the plastics and the oils on the roads as well. Worm manure has excellent water holding capacity. It can retain 50% more moisture. It can build resilience against extreme periods of droughts and heavy rainfall. And so that's why we're encouraging, you know, its use in agriculture. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. Food security. So we have less than 60 years of global topsoil left due to the industrialization of agriculture over many decades. Worm farming can provide the foundations for healthy food production to flourish. I don't know whether any of you watching today or who watched the recording have seen the film 6 Inches of Soil. It's a great film. It was shown at Reghead. It's going to be shown at Reghead again, I understand it, and at other venues across Cumbria. If you get the opportunity, do go and see it. It's probably the initial film, I would have said, in a series that really starts to look at people getting into food production and farming, but also how important the soil and the structure and health of our soils are. We're starting to look at the potential for vermiculture as a sustainable enterprise or a circular economy. So we've started to look at its use on utilising farm manure in windrow sites, and a windrow is just a sort of trench made out of manure, basically. This has the opportunity to provide a diversification income for Cumbrian farmers, to help improve soil quality and to reduce the reliance on costly inorganic fertilisers. We're also looking at it as a way in which to reduce costs of waste management. So, for example, the purple bins that get taken away by waste companies, and that just goes to landfill. Some of it in Cumbria gets turned into a compost. And I need to look into that a bit more, but generally speaking, it's going to landfill. We've started to look at how we can create vermicomposting units that reduce hospitality food waste. And just going back to the type of composting and the issue of rats that was mentioned before. So this is an aerated composting system, but it's in a closed bin. So it means there's air going through it because the worms need air and they need moisture, but there's a base and there is a lid. It's a very low cost, very low input solution to reducing food waste, and it has the potential to generate an income because you get an end product that can be sold on, and it also has the ability to cut waste disposal costs and the emissions that come with that. And you can distribute the surplus, so the vermicompost and liquid feed can go back to farms, it can go back to growing outlets, and it can go to community gardens as well. So this is what we're doing at the moment. We've started to work at Vermiculture Cumbria with some partners. We're working with Anna de la Vega. She's absolutely wonderful. She runs and set up the Urban Worm CIC. She's in Nottingham, and she's worked with everybody from the Military of Defence to Wagamama to shopping malls to prisons, and setting up vermiculture composting units. We've started by working with Growing Well at Lowsizer Farm and at their T-Bay Market Garden. We've set up both windrow demonstration sites and vermicomposter so that they can put any of their food waste into the compost units. We've also set one up at Westmorelands Limited T-Bay at the northbound services. And if anybody's interested to look at Ridan composters and a worm composter, you can see them right there. If you just park up at T-Bay North, they're right there next to the car park. So T-Bay North, they're a vermicomposter host organisation. Obviously, they have a huge amount of food waste, although they're trying to reduce that all the time. What we have done, and we should get the analysis in the next 6 months, is to look at the difference between the nutrient levels in the Ridan composting system, the hot composter that you turn, and the vermicomposter system. So that will be interesting to look at that in the next 6 months. And this picture shows Frankie. Thanks to the master composters for all their support. They were absolutely fantastic at both sites helping us. And that's it at the moment, although I'm very happy to take questions. We can support you if you're interested in setting up vermiculture. I can support you through the low carbon food programme. And if you're an SME, Gemma's already mentioned the fact that CAP's are part of the Westmoreland and Furness Green Enterprise Hub. So there are grants available, not just for vermiculture, but for all the things that Gemma talked about, carbon reduction for your SME. And we're really happy to support, and I'm happy to support in any way that I can. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ro. So I've
Thanks.
just got a little case study to share with everybody now. So this is a case study from a couple of years ago from Embleton Hotel and Spa near Cockermouth. Unfortunately, Ali wasn't able to be with us today, but he has done a little video that we can have a look through. So just to give you a little bit of background, Embleton Spa Hotel, family-run hotel, bar and restaurant located between Cockermouth and Keswick. They are originally an 18th century farmhouse, and the site caters for a range of ensuite rooms, suites and standalone apartments. So the owners, Ali and Joe, composted at home and wanted to know how they could ramp that up basically onto an industrial level and provide that for the business as well. So they invested in a ride and hot composter. They did get funding towards it from the Lake District Foundation as part of a low carbon Lake District grant scheme a couple of years ago. So the total cost of the composter at that point was £5,000, and they got £3,000 towards the cost of funding that. And they've worked out that over the period that they've had it, due to the decrease in waste disposal from site, they reckon they're saving at least £1,000 a year in terms of waste disposal. So there's potentially a 5-year payback period for that investment. But they also think that they're saving about 3.5 tonnes of carbon a year by using it as well. Which, if you think the average Westerner's carbon footprint per annum is sort of 10 to 13 tonnes, that's still quite a significant saving, really. See if we can get this to play. I'll see if we can get it.
Excellent business owner here at Embleton Spa Hotel.
Can people see
so at
that?
home,
Yeah, that's working.
composter for a number of years, and a little veg patch, and we think, well, actually, as a business, the opportunity is far bigger than just my family of 5. If we can do some of that stuff here, we can have a far bigger impact than we can just as a family at home. Take all of our waste from the kitchen, so food preparation waste, then all of the plate scrapings, so anything that comes out of the restaurant and back into the kitchen, that can all go in. And it's called hot composting. So it's a little different to a normal garden composter in that it's very well insulated, and the idea is it keeps all of the heat from the composting process within the composter itself, and that allows the temperature inside the composter to be much higher, up to about 60 degrees. And that's all just driven by bacteria. You can see it out of the window in the restaurant and say, well, oh, what's that? Oh, that's a really good idea, you know. So it's just nice to see that there is interest in this sort of thing. I think we can all see, and we've all read and we've all heard what's happening with the climate. So if we can find ways to improve things, to motivate people to make small changes in their lifestyles, then that can only be a good thing.
That's really positive, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah, it's so I think from that point of view for them, it's definitely a solution that works. And I do know that he's currently growing potatoes in some of his compost at the moment. It's so yeah, it's more about finding a solution that works for you, I think. And in terms of that initial investment, as Ro was saying, if you're in Westmoreland and Furness area and you're an SME, then you do qualify to apply for some funding for help for that. So I think for applications up to £3,000, there's no match funding required, but then between £3,000 and £10,000, there is a 30% match funding. And in terms of the carbon reduction of that, the cost reduction of that, potentially Embleton Spa are finding that it will take them about 5 years to pay off that initial investment, including the grant as well. And if you think about, that's just based on purely the removal from site costs, but then if you think about the additional cost of everything else that's gone into that compost and things, it does add up. So yeah, and they're looking at ways of being able to extend it with the hope that in the future they can use some of that compost and work with community gardens and things like that as well. So yes, it's a really positive message. So does anybody have any questions for our panel? If you just want to raise hands or unmute yourselves. No questions.
That means we've either sent them to sleep or we've been very thorough.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it is worth bearing in mind. I think there is kind of a range of options. There's definitely a range of costs associated with that as well. I know from businesses I've spoken to, as a lot of people have said, a lot of the key concern is around whether it's a sealed unit and the health and safety issues potentially with rats and things. But I think that's again something to look at the type of composting. Wendy, have you got a question, Wendy?
Hi, I've got a question. Can you see me? I'm Louise. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've inherited basically a system from my mum who died a number of years ago. I don't know how it works. There's 3 side-by-side kind of square. It looked a little bit like the pallets. Yeah, but it's made, they're actually divided up by little stone walls, so it's obviously really good. But I don't know why there are 3, so we kind of randomly chuck stuff in one, and then when it's full up we start using the other one. And is that can you explain?
You want to explain, Frankie? It's a perfect system. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted, Frankie.
Sorry, yes, that is the perfect system. You basically you fill one up. When that's full, you can turn it into the next one, which kind of helps get some air into it, and then start filling the next one up. And that then you can at some point you can turn that one into the next one, let it mature, and then kind of it's an ongoing process basically. In probably about a year, if you've turned it a few times, that first batch will be ready to use. So yeah, it is a perfect system to do it like that. It's
Okay,
probably the best, if you've got the space, it's probably the best way and the most low-tech way to compost.
So we put everything in, as it were, the left-hand one all the time.
Yeah.
Then when it's full, we turn it into the middle one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then at some point we turn that into the third one.
Yes.
Yes. But what I was going to caveat that with, I have bays in my quite small suburban back garden, just built out of old pallets, and we've just got 2 bays. And actually, because I'm really lazy, I don't turn mine. So I just fill one up and then start filling the other, and so it will rot. The turning is great because it will speed the process up, but you don't have to turn it. You could just literally fill a bay, leave it, and then start filling the next one. And then start filling the third one after you fill the second one. And then, after about a year or maybe a bit more, because you haven't turned it, the very first one that you filled will rot it down. But it's what the problem is, often people will fill their bin and just keep filling it and keep going, oh, nothing's happening, because they haven't seen that actually at the bottom it's turned into compost, and they're just putting fresh stuff on the top. So the idea is to sort of fill it, just maybe cover it with some cardboard or just something to just and that's done. Let it just do its thing and rot down. And yes, you can even turn it within the bay. You don't have to turn it over into another bay. You could just sort of mix it around a bit to get it aerated. But having more than, I should have said that, actually, having more than one bin or bay is great, because once you've filled one, you just leave it alone or turn it, and then you start doing the next one. So you've always got like a batch that's ready and a batch that's cooking kind of thing. And that's all it is. It's not anything more complicated. So
that's brilliant. Thank you. That's what I needed to know. Thanks very much.
I think I do have a slight question actually for the composters. So sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, the bokashi, is it? Composting. The bran that you use, is that about fermentation or anything? I was just wondering if, I know we've got a few, if there's an alternative to the bran, because I know we've got a few breweries in Cumbria that have waste product and things like that. I just wondered
Go on, Frankie.
what the function of the bran is and how that works, really.
So the bran is inoculated with effective microorganisms. So it is possible to yes, it is possible to inoculate bran that you have with. You can buy a spray or a liquid as well. So it's basically harnessing that those effective microorganisms to ferment the waste. So yes, in theory you can, but you would need the effective microorganism liquid or spray to inoculate them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. My other question as well is the one that I get quite a lot, especially from my other half, who is our master composter in-house, is when is it ready? How do you know when compost is ready?
Oh, Frankie, you can answer that one. You're the expert at that.
So in some systems it does break down quite quickly and it looks like compost, and it should have like an earthy smell, and all the sort of bugs should have left it, so it should be sort of all crumbly and dry. But a good way to sort of test it is to put it in a sealed bag, put a little sample in a sealed bag, you know, one of those sort of plastic Ziploc bags, so that it's completely sealed. And if you open it after a couple of days and it's starting to be a bit stinky, then it still needs a little bit of time to mature. But at the same time, you can kind of use it. You can use it as a mulch before it is sort of fully matured. If you were using it in a potting mix, you would want it to be properly done.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Well, thank you very much to all of our speakers and everyone who managed to join us today. So we will be sending the recording round afterwards, and all the different presentations as well, copies of. So any of the links that are included, you should then have copies of as well. And again, this the webinar will also go up on the Cumbria Tourism website to be accessed there. So thank you very much, everybody.